Well, good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Evan Smith. I'm on staff at Intervarsity Christian Fellowship, and this church has been supporting us for a couple of years now. I'm so grateful for your partnership. So that's one of the things I'm here to say this morning is thank you. Thank you so much for investing in our mission to York College. If you're unfamiliar with Intervarsity Christian Fellowship, I'll just say a little bit about what our mission is generally. As Intervarsity, we are on campus on purpose to build diverse, witnessing communities of students and faculty who are growing in love for God, for God's Word, for God's people of every ethnicity and culture, and for God's purposes in the world. We hope to see students, individual students' lives transformed by the truth of the gospel of Jesus. And we long to see college campuses become places where faith lives can grow and flourish and not be beaten down. And we long to see those college students whose lives have been transformed on campus go out into the world to change the world for the better. We long to see God's mission advancing through the world as a result of these college students having been transformed during their time in college, because it's such a critical time of their lives. So I'd love to answer a few questions about Intervarsity, so I'm going to try and keep my remarks fairly short so that we can do a little bit of a Q&A at the end. So as I'm speaking, if you have any questions, just kind of hold those in your mind, and if I don't get to your questions right now, I'll be around after the service as well, and I just love to talk about what God's doing on campus, so I could talk for hours, but I won't. I'd like to tell a couple of stories today to kind of flesh out what our mission is about at York College. I'm going to tell you the story of a guy named Bill. Bill's not his actual name, but I changed his name to protect his identity. It's like one of those cop shows. My second year on staff, I met Bill. It was his freshman year. He was loud, he was fidgety, he was rude, he had really poor personal hygiene. He couldn't control the volume of his voice, and he had a really unhealthy obsession with the band Kiss. He was adamantly atheistic, and though he came to our small group regularly, it was a small group that I was leading in a freshman dorm at the time, he came to our small group Bible study regularly. His contributions were almost always disruptive. Most of the time he would just kind of sit there in the corner and not really say anything and act like he wasn't really paying attention. We all kind of wondered, what is he even doing here? It seems like he doesn't want to be here. But every now and then he'd raise his hand and offer a comment, and invariably it would just derail the whole thing. That was Bill, freshman year. 4 years later, he stood in front of a room full of Christian college students and shouted a profanity-laced testimony to God's love for him that nearly brought me to tears. So, how did that happen exactly? Why did Bill choose to stick around for all 4 years of college? What was it that brought him to the point of giving his life to Jesus? And why was he cussing during his testimony? I don't know that I can fully answer all of those questions, but the passage that Ken read from Mark chapter 2, I think, offers a little bit of context, because really Bill's story mirrors the one told in Mark chapter 2. In Mark 2, we see this paralyzed man. Let's call him Phil. Bill and Phil. Let's call a paralyzed man Phil. Phil has these friends who bring him to Jesus because they believe that Jesus can do something for him. Now, it's helpful to kind of try and picture what Phil's life is like as a paralyzed man in first century Palestine. This guy, he's paralyzed. He can't move. He can't walk. That means that he probably can't hold down a job, which means that he can't probably support a family. Which means that he probably doesn't have a wife. He probably doesn't have children. He probably doesn't have a job. He's probably dependent on the generosity of strangers or acquaintances to give him what he needs to live. And in a lot of ways, that strikes to the very core of the identity of a man in that context, and maybe even in our own context. To be unable to have a family, to be unable to support one's family because of this paralysis that he suffered. And to top it all off, a common religious thought at the time was that if something terrible had happened to you, if you suffered some catastrophic illness, it was probably because of some sin that you had committed, or maybe that your folks had committed. So this is Phil's life. It would have been pretty rough. But Phil has some friends. He has these 4 fellows who care about him. And they hear that Jesus is in town. This kind of wandering itinerant preacher, and we've heard stories that he can actually heal people and restore sight to the blind, and well, maybe he can do something for our friend Phil. So they go over to Phil's place, they load him up on his mat, and they carry him to the place where they heard that Jesus is. Well, they get there, and the story goes, the building is packed. It's fuller than this church is right now. It's standing room only, shoulder to shoulder. It's not probably a large house, because houses at that time were maybe 18 by 15 feet wide, so it's probably a pretty small house. But it's standing room only. And Jesus is in there teaching, and there's people crowded in, and they're even overflowing out the doorway, because there's just not enough room for everybody to get in to hear Jesus as want to get in. So these 4 guys show up with their friend Phil on his mat. How are they going to get in? Well, men of lesser fortitude might have turned around and gone home, or maybe tried to figure out where's the next place Jesus is going to show up, and we'll just get there early to get really good seats. And no, these men will not be stopped. They've got to get their friend to Jesus. So they pull a MacGyver. They climb up on top of this house, all right? And they just start digging. Now picture the scene. If you're inside the house, just kind of try and place yourself in this context, all right? So you're in there, you're hearing this renowned teacher speaking, and all of a sudden you start hearing this, kind of a scratching sound, and, well, maybe it's wild animals up on the roof, who knows, but then it gets louder. You start hearing some pounding, maybe you start seeing debris falling from the roof, chunks of plaster falling, and a shaft of sunlight. And somehow these guys have triangulated whereabouts Jesus is in the house, and they just started digging a hole right above him. And, picture being the homeowner, all right? These guys are digging a hole in your house. They will not be stopped. They have to get their friend to Jesus. And so it's dead silent, of course, because who's gonna try and speak during this crazy event that's happening right above you? All of a sudden, the most unexpected things happen. A couple of faces peering down through the hole, and then a body being lowered through the hole on a bed. This is a very, very strange scene. Well, Jesus is there, and Jesus offers to heal him. But an unexpected thing happens. Jesus doesn't just heal him on the spot physically. He forgives his sins. That is not what his friends were expecting Jesus to do. Maybe they're a little disappointed, maybe they're speechless, maybe they're trying to figure out what is Jesus getting at. There are some religious teachers in the building, and they're really offended that Jesus just forgave sins, because that's something that only God can do. But you see, that's what Jesus does. He doesn't just offer healing. He's not content to slap a Band-Aid on the problem. Jesus isn't content with palliative care. No. Jesus sees to the very root, to the very core of who this guy is. And he chooses to heal him on that level before he heals his physical issue. He doesn't look at this paralyzed man and say, oh, here's a man whose body is broken. But he looks at him and says, here's a man whose soul is broken, along with his body. We're gonna fix that too. Jesus offers the best healing. And he always speaks to the deadlier issue. I think that there's something in that for us. I mean, can you think of a time when Jesus has come through for you in a way that exceeded your expectations? A time when maybe you had one specific issue that you were hoping that Jesus would offer rescue from or healing from. And he did that, but he even went a little further. If you can't think of one off the top of your head, pay attention. Because odds are he's doing that, left and right. And maybe we just haven't seen it yet. But Jesus is always better than we expect him to be. What does that have to do with my friend Bill? Well, both of their stories are stories of friends wanting good things for their friends. It's a story about those friends having hope and perseverance, even when they're tired of hoping, even when they're tired of carrying along the dead weight of their friends. It's a story of friends taking risks to get Bill or Phil to Jesus. And ultimately, it's a story of Jesus honoring that and delivering way more than the friends expected. As Bill shared his testimony that night a couple of years ago, Bill told about how it was Christians who cared for him when other people avoided him. And you can see why people avoided him. Because, I gave you the description of what he was like. He smelled bad, he cussed, he couldn't control the volume of his voice, he was into Kiss. Well, these are not the marks of a popular man. Well, it was Christians who cared for him. It was Christians who stayed in a relationship with him for 4 years. He'd always known that he was different. His whole life, Bill had known that he was different. And that people didn't really want to be his friends. But his InterVarsity friends had been like family for him when he was finally diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which helped to explain a lot of what he had experienced in his life. That he was suffering from a kind of autism. His friends at InterVarsity, this community, made a difference for him. They loved him, even when he disrupted their Bible studies. They loved him when he made insulting comments about their appearances. They loved him, even when he felt betrayed by his own family. Their love was really just a reflection of God's love for him. And they were Bill's means of conveyance to that great physician, Jesus Christ, lover and healer of our souls. That's just one story of transformation from students that I work with. There are hundreds more. But I love the story of Bill. I think especially because it so closely parallels the story of this paralyzed man. About a person who didn't necessarily want anything to do with Jesus, but he had friends who cared for him and got him to Jesus when he couldn't get himself there. That's the story of Bill. There's so many more stories like that, but I'd love to put the question to you. Who are the Bills and the Phils in your own lives? Who are the people who need Jesus but just can't seem to get to him by themselves? Who are the people around you who are maybe just really hard to love? And what role is God inviting you to have in getting them there to Jesus, to that great healer? Experiences like Bill's are only made possible through the generous support of this congregation and of other congregations around central Pennsylvania. So I personally thank you for your support. And I just love to talk about InterVarsity and what God is doing at your college. So as I said, I'll be around afterwards, certainly to answer any questions and to share a little bit more about the ministry if you're interested. I'll be out there greeting, well, I guess, whatever the opposite of greeting is as you're leaving the building. I'll also be downstairs for a little bit. I'm happy to speak to your Sunday school classes or whatever. So, but yeah, thank you so much for your support. And I'd love to just take maybe 2 or 3 questions right now while we have a couple of minutes, and if anybody is interested. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for your message and what you're doing. I think we all love that you care doing that. And also, my question is it more about praying this prayer and going to heaven, or building a relationship, them building a relationship with God?
Oh, it's all about. Oh, sure. Yeah, she was asking if I'm understanding